Maya Williams stared at her phone screen at 2 in the morning, rent notice crumpled beside her anatomy textbook, and typed the most desperate message of her life to the wrong number. The exhaustion of pulling double shifts at the campus medical center while maintaining her nursing program grades had finally caught up with her, and in her bleary state, she mistyped the last digit of her best friend Keisha's number. "Please, I know it's late, but I'm about to lose everything," she typed, fingers trembling. "Landlord wants 3 months' rent by Friday, or I'm out. Can't drop out of nursing school when I'm this close. Grandma needs her medication, and I can't let her down. I don't know what else to do." She hit send before double-checking the contact, then collapsed back against her pillow in her tiny studio apartment, surrounded by medical textbooks and the smell of instant ramen. The radiator clanked ominously, another bill she couldn't afford to fix. 3 time zones away in a downtown Seattle boardroom, Jin-Woo Kim felt his phone vibrate during the most critical moment of a territorial negotiation that would determine the future of his family's operations on the West Coast. The heads of 3 rival factions sat around the obsidian conference table, each word weighted with the potential for violence, each pause measured in millions of dollars and human lives. He glanced at the screen out of habit, expecting another coded message from his security team or a terse update from his lieutenant. Instead, he found raw desperation from an unknown number, vulnerability so genuine it stopped in mid-sentence. The other men noticed his pause. In their world, distraction meant weakness, and weakness meant death. "I apologize," he said in the controlled tone that had negotiated ceasefires and ordered executions with equal calm. "Please continue." But his mind remained fixed on the message. In 15 years of climbing from street enforcer to the head of the most powerful Korean syndicate on the Pacific Coast, Jin-Woo had never encountered anything so unguarded. Everyone who contacted him wanted something, but their request came wrapped in fear, greed, or calculated manipulation. This message held none of those elements, only desperate honesty. When the meeting concluded an hour later with territorial boundaries redrawn and tribute percentages adjusted, Jin-Woo dismissed his men and sat alone in the empty boardroom. City lights stretched below the 40th floor windows, each point of illumination representing lives he could control or destroy with a single decision. He studied the message again, then activated the secure software that could trace any number back to its owner within minutes. Maya Williams, 23 years old, third-year nursing student at Portland Community College. No criminal record, no outstanding debts beyond the student loans and rent arrears mentioned in her text. No connections to any organization that might use her as bait or leverage against him. Completely, authentically innocent. The photograph in her student file showed warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, natural hair pulled back in a neat bun, the kind of genuine smile that suggested she still believed the world could be fair. She looked nothing like the women who usually entered his orbit, the ones who sought power through association with danger, who wore their ambition like expensive perfume. Where are you watching from tonight? Have you ever sent a message to the wrong number that changed everything? Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and whether you think some mistakes are actually meant to happen. Jin-Woo found himself reaching for his phone before he could analyze the impulse. His thumbs hesitated over the screen. In his world, curiosity was a luxury that could prove fatal, and personal involvement was a weakness that enemies would exploit without mercy. But something about her message called to a part of him that he thought had died years ago, back when idealism was beaten out of him in the training compounds of Busan, when family honor became his cage and duty became his only identity. "Your message was intended for someone else," he typed, then paused. The standard response would be to inform her of the error and delete the number. Protocol demanded he maintain the careful distance that kept his world separate from the ordinary lives of people who still believed in fairness and second chances. Instead, he found himself adding, "However, I am curious about your situation." The response came back within seconds, as if she had been staring at her phone, waiting. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I meant to text my friend. Please ignore that. It's not your problem." But then, after a pause that he could almost feel through the screen, another message appeared. "Unless you happen to know anything about emergency financial aid for nursing students, which is probably a long shot, but I'm kind of desperate here." Jin-Woo set down his phone and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled beneath him, a territory he controlled through carefully orchestrated violence, and the kind of fear that made men wake up in cold sweats. Everything in his life was measured, calculated, designed to maintain the perfect balance of power that kept his family's empire intact. Everything except this moment. He returned to his phone and typed carefully, "I may be able to offer assistance. What is your address?" The response took longer this time, and he could imagine her weighing the wisdom of giving personal information to a stranger. When it finally came, it included her address followed by a question. "Are you some kind of angel investor or something? This feels too good to be true, and my grandma always said if something seems too good to be true, it probably is." Jinwoo almost smiled. In his world, he was many things. Angel was not among them. "I will be there in 6 hours," he typed. "Do not leave your apartment until then." He ended the conversation before she could respond and called his driver. Maya stared at her phone until the screen went dark, then stared at her reflection in the black surface. Either she had just been contacted by the answer to her prayers, or she had managed to stumble into something far more complicated than overdue rent. The smart thing would be to ignore the whole exchange and figure out another solution. The smart thing would be to recognize that mysterious strangers who offered financial help at 3 in the morning were probably not the kind of help she needed. But smart things required luxury she didn't have. Smart things were for people who had options. At 8:30 in the morning, exhaustion had given way to nervous energy that had her pacing the 6 steps from her kitchenette to her bed and back again. She had managed 3 hours of fitful sleep before her internal alarm clock woke her, the one trained by years of early morning shifts and clinical rotations. When a knock came, it was nothing like the aggressive pounding she had expected. 3 measured raps, patient and controlled. Maya looked through the peephole and forgot how to breathe. The man standing in her hallway was nothing like the college-aged Good Samaritan she had imagined. He wore a charcoal wool coat that probably cost more than her semester tuition, and everything about his posture suggested control power, the kind of stillness that came from absolute confidence in one's ability to handle any situation. When she opened the door, leaving the security chain attached, his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her acutely aware of every detail of her appearance. Her rumpled scrubs from the previous night's shift, her hair escaping from its ponytail, the shadows under her eyes that spoke of months of pushing herself past reasonable limits. "You are Maya Williams," he said. Not a question, but a statement delivered in a voice like aged whiskey, accented with the careful precision of someone for whom English was a second language mastered to perfection. "Yes," she replied, though the word came out smaller than she intended. "My name is Jinwoo Kim. You sent me a message last night." The morning light streaming through her window seemed to bend around him, and Maya realized that whatever she had stumbled into was far more significant than a simple wrong number, and far more dangerous than anything she had ever encountered in her carefully planned, thoroughly ordinary life. Maya opened the door fully, the security chain sliding away with a metallic whisper that seemed to echo the last of her common sense disappearing. Jinwoo Kim stepped into her tiny studio apartment, and suddenly the space felt microscopic, overwhelmed by his presence and the subtle scent of expensive cologne mixed with something darker she couldn't identify. He moved with the fluid economy of a predator, taking in every detail of her living situation with a single sweeping glance. The stack of medical bills on her rickety table, the textbooks held together with tape, the photograph of her grandmother taped to the bathroom mirror, the only decoration she could afford. "Your rent has been paid," he said without preamble, settling into her single chair as if he owned it. 3 months, plus the late fees. "Your tuition account has also been brought current through the end of the semester." Maya's knees gave out, and she sank on her unmade bed, staring at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. I didn't ask you to do that. I can't accept that." The amount was trivial, he replied with the casual dismissal of someone for whom money was merely a tool. "However, nothing in this world is free. You now owe me a considerable debt." The relief that had flooded through her at his words turned instantly to ice in her veins. She had grown up in neighborhoods where debts to the wrong people meant broken bones and disappeared relatives. Where owing money to strangers who dressed like they owned the world never ended well for people like her. "What do you want?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Jinwoo studied her with those dark eyes that seemed to see everything, and Maya fought the urge to look away. In her clinical training, she had learned to read people quickly, to assess pain levels and emotional states with a glance. But this man was unreadable, his expression controlled to the point of being carved from stone. "I require a translator for my import business," he said finally. "Someone with intelligence and discretion. Someone who can be trusted with sensitive information and who understands the value of silence." Maya's mind raced through the implications. She spoke Korean fluently, a skill inherited from her grandmother who had worked as a seamstress in Koreatown for 40 years before Maya was born. But she also wasn't naive enough to believe that a man who could casually pay thousands of dollars and show up at her door at dawn was involved in anything as simple as importing goods. "What kind of import business?" she asked. "The kind that requires absolute loyalty and complete discretion," he replied, standing and moving to her window. From there, he could probably see the entire courtyard, every entrance and exit. The kind where asking too many questions demonstrates poor judgment. Maya felt her pride flare, the same stubborn streak that had gotten her through nursing school despite working 2 jobs and caring for her grandmother. "And if I refuse, then you will repay the debt through other means," he said, turning back to face her with that same controlled calm. "The interest rate is quite reasonable. Only 30% per week." The number hit her like a physical blow. At that rate, she would owe more than the original amount within a month, and the debt would spiral beyond anything she could ever hope to repay. She would lose her apartment, her education, everything she had worked for. "You're blackmailing me," she said. "I am offering you employment," he corrected. "The terms are generous. Your debt will be forgiven over the course of 6 months, and you will receive additional compensation for your services. You will work standard business hours, allowing you to maintain your class schedule." Maya stared at him, seeing the trap closing around her with mathematical precision. He had researched her thoroughly, knew exactly how desperate she was, exactly what pressure points would force her compliance. But beneath her fear, something else stirred. Anger. "And if I do a good job, what happens after 6 months?" she asked. "That will depend on your performance," he replied, "and your decision about whether you wish to continue the arrangement." Maya stood, crossing her arms over her chest. "I have conditions." His eyebrows rose slightly, the first genuine expression she had seen from him. "You are hardly in a position to negotiate. I'm in a position to be useful to you or to be a liability," she said, channeling every ounce of confidence she had learned in clinical settings where lives depended on her ability to think clearly under pressure. "If you want me to work for you, we do this my way." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the tiny apartment. Maya could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, but she kept her chin up and her voice steady. "Speak," he said finally. "I don't work weekends. I need those days for studying and clinical rotations. I don't do anything illegal, and if I see something that makes me uncomfortable, I walk away. And I want a written contract that specifies exactly how my debt decreases with each month of work." Jinwoo's mouth curved in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "You wish to negotiate with me as if you have leverage in this situation. I have something you need, or you wouldn't be here," Maya replied. "And you clearly don't want someone who's just going to nod and smile and do whatever you say without thinking. Otherwise, you would have hired any of the dozen Korean translators in Portland who probably have more experience than me." "Astute," he said, and there was something in his voice that might have been approval. "Very well. Your conditions are acceptable, with one addition. You will follow all security protocols without question. My world can be dangerous for those who are careless." "Deal," Maya said, extending her hand. When Jinwoo took it, his palm was warm and calloused, the grip of someone accustomed to handling both weapons and power. The contact lasted only seconds, but Maya felt something electric pass between them, recognition of some kind that made her breath catch. "You will begin Monday morning," he said, releasing her hand and moving toward the door. 8 o'clock sharp. The address is 1247 Southwest Morrison Street, 4th floor. After he left, Maya sank back on her bed and stared at her phone screen, which still displayed their text conversation from the night before. In less than 12 hours, her entire life had changed direction. She was now employed by a man who could pay her debts without blinking and who carried himself like violence was a language he spoke fluently. She spent the weekend researching everything she could find about Jin-Woo Kim and his business interests. What she discovered made her stomach churn with anxiety and something that felt disturbingly like anticipation. Kim Holdings International owned dozens of legitimate businesses throughout the Pacific Northwest. Restaurants, real estate, import companies, security services. But buried in the business filings and newspaper archives, she found hints of something darker. Charges that had been mysteriously dropped. Witnesses who had disappeared before trials. Competitors whose businesses had failed after refusing buyout offers. By Monday morning, Maya knew she was walking into the orbit of organized crime. She also knew she had no choice but to go through with it. The building on Morrison Street was modern glass and steel, the kind of corporate headquarters that could house anything from tech startups to accounting firms. The directory in the lobby listed Kim Holdings International on the 4th floor, along with several subsidiary companies she recognized from her research. The elevator opened onto a reception area that looked like it belonged in a high-end law firm. Polished marble floors, expensive artwork, furniture that probably cost more than her entire education. The receptionist was an elegant Korean woman in her 30s who looked up when Maya approached. "Maya Williams," she said. "I'm here to see Mr. Kim. He is expecting you." The woman replied in perfect, unaccented English. "Conference room 3. I will escort you." As they walked down the hallway, Maya noticed details that spoke of serious security concerns. No windows in the interior offices. Reinforced doors. Camera systems that tracked their movement with mechanical precision. The conference room contained a long table surrounded by leather chairs, and Jin-Woo sat at the head wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. He looked up when she entered, and his gaze swept over her professional outfit with the same analytical intensity he had shown in her apartment. "Punctual," he observed. "That is encouraging." Maya took the seat he indicated, noting that it positioned her with her back to the wall and a clear view of both exits. In clinical settings, she had learned to read environments for potential dangers, and every instinct she had developed told her that this man's world was built around the management of violence. "Your first assignment is straightforward," he continued, sliding a folder across the table. "These documents require translation from Korean to English. They concern a shipping manifest for a container arriving from Busan this Friday." Maya opened the folder and scanned the first page. The language was formal business Korean, the kind her grandmother had taught her during long afternoons in the seamstress shop. But as she read further, her translation skills revealed details that made her hands grow cold. "These aren't just shipping documents," she said quietly. "No," Jin-Woo agreed. "They are not." Maya looked up to find him watching her with that same unreadable expression. The moment felt like a test, and she sensed that her next words would determine whether she walked out of this room or found herself trapped deeper in whatever web she had stumbled into. "I'll translate them," she said finally. "But I want to know what I'm really translating before I sign anything." Jin-Woo leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since she had met him, Maya thought she saw something like respect flicker across his features. "That, Miss Williams, can be arranged." Within 2 weeks, Maya had translated enough shipping manifests, business contracts, and financial documents to understand that Jin-Woo Kim operated a legitimate empire built on a foundation of calculated illegality. She also discovered that her linguistic skills were more valuable than she had anticipated. The formal business Korean she had learned from her grandmother contained nuances that most professional translators missed, cultural subtleties that could change the meaning of entire contracts. She was working late on a particularly complex document involving real estate acquisitions when Jin-Woo emerged from his private office, loosening his tie with hands that Maya had noticed were always controlled, always precise. "The Patterson building acquisition," he said, settling into the chair across from her. What did you find in the subsidiary clauses? Maya looked up from her laptop, noting the exhaustion around his eyes that he probably thought he concealed perfectly. 3 shell companies are listed as co-investors, but the ownership structure routes back to a single source in Vancouver. Someone's trying to hide their involvement in the deal. Jean Wu nodded slowly, his expression revealing nothing, but Maya caught the slight tension in his shoulders that suggested the information confirmed something he had suspected. Your grandmother taught you well, he said. Most translators would have missed those connections. She also taught me to recognize when people are trying to cheat other people, Maya replied, saving her work and closing the laptop. The question is whether you're the one doing the cheating or try to prevent it. For a moment, Jean Wu's controlled facade cracked, and Maya saw something that might have been surprise flicker across his features. In her world of medical training and clinical rotations, direct questions were expected, even demanded. Apparently in his world, they were unusual enough to catch him off guard. His phone rang before he could respond, and Maya watched his expression shift from surprise to coldly furious as he listened to whoever was on the other end. We will discuss this in person, he said finally, his voice carrying an edge that made Maya's skin prickle with recognition of danger. 20 minutes. He ended the call and stood with a fluid grace that Maya was beginning to associate with barely contained violence. I have business to attend to, he said. You should go home. But instead of leaving, Maya found herself standing as well. What kind of business requires that particular tone of voice? Jean Wu paused in the doorway of his office, and when he turned back to look at her, his eyes held a warning that would have sent most people running. The kind that you should not involve yourself with, Miss Williams. Maya had spent 3 years in clinical training, learning to read people under stress, to recognize when someone was about to make a decision they would regret. Every instinct she had developed told her that Jean Wu was walking toward violence, and that whatever had prompted that phone call was personal enough to override his usual calculation. I'm coming with you, she said. Absolutely not. You said I was supposed to follow security protocols, Maya replied, grabbing her purse and moving toward the elevator. Leaving me alone in the office while you go handle something that clearly has you angry seems like a security risk. Jean Wu stared at her for a long moment, and Maya could almost see him weighing the wisdom of arguing with her against the time it would cost him. You will remain in the car, he said finally. You will not interfere, and you will not ask questions about what you observe. 20 minutes later, Maya sat in the passenger seat of Jean Wu's black Mercedes, watching him stride into a small Korean grocery store with the focused intensity of a man preparing for war. Through the store windows, she could see an elderly Korean couple standing behind the counter, the woman clutching her husband's arm, while a younger man in an expensive tracksuit gestured aggressively at them. Maya understood enough Korean to follow the basics of the conversation, even through the car windows. The man was demanding protection money, threatening to burn down the store if the elderly couple didn't pay. It was the kind of neighborhood shakedown that happened in every city, the strong preying on the vulnerable. What she hadn't expected was Jean Wu's reaction. He entered the store like a force of nature, and within seconds a man in the tracksuit was pressed against the wall with Jean Wu's hand around his throat. The violence was swift, controlled, and absolutely terrifying in its precision. Maya couldn't hear the words Jean Wu spoke, but she could see their effect. The man's face went white with terror, and when Jean Wu released him, he scrambled toward the door without looking back. The elderly couple bowed deeply to Jean Wu, their gratitude obvious even from a distance. He spoke to them quietly, his posture gentling in a way that Maya found more surprising than his capacity for violence. When he handed them a business card, the woman clutched it like a lifeline. He returned to the car in silence, his knuckles showing the first signs of bruising. Your hand is injured, Maya said as he started the engine. It is nothing. Maya reached into her purse and pulled out the small first aid kit she carried everywhere, a habit from her clinical rotations. Let me look at it. Jean Wu's eyes flicked to her, then to the first aid kit, and something in his expression shifted. When he pulled over at the next red light, he extended his hand without a word. Maya took his hand carefully, noting the calluses that spoke of weapons training and the scars that suggested this wasn't his first violent encounter. The skin across his knuckles was split and beginning to swell, but the injury was superficial. As she cleaned the cuts with antiseptic wipes, she became acutely aware of the intimacy of the moment. His hand was larger than hers, warm and surprisingly gentle despite the violence she had just witnessed. "Why did you do that?" she asked quietly, applying butterfly bandages with the precision of someone trained in emergency medicine. "They are good people," Jean Wu replied. "They have operated that store for 30 years. They should not have to pay tribute to parasites." Maya looked up at him, seeing something in his expression that she hadn't expected. Underneath the controlled exterior and the capacity for violence, there was a code of honor that governed his actions. "Your grandmother," she said, still holding his hand. "She shopped there." He nodded once, a brief acknowledgement that revealed more about his motivations than any explanation could have. "Family honor is everything in my world," he said as Maya finished treating his hand. "Duty to those who deserve protection. These concepts shaped me before I was old enough to understand their cost." Maya released his hand, but didn't move away. She had grown up understanding duty too, the weight of being the only person between her grandmother and poverty, between her community's medical needs and indifferent healthcare systems. "My grandmother taught me that we protect the people we love," she said, "even when it's hard, even when it costs us everything we thought we wanted." Jean Wu turned to study her profile in the dashboard lights, and Maya felt the weight of his attention like a physical presence. "What did you want?" he asked. "Before you sent that message to the wrong number." "To finish nursing school. To work in community medicine, helping people who couldn't afford private doctors. To make sure my grandmother never had to worry about choosing between medication and rent." "Simple goals," he observed. "Noble ones." Maya laughed, though the sound held little humor. "Simple and impossible, you mean? Do you know how much medical school costs? How many years of debt I'd be looking at even if I could find a way to pay for the rest of my education?" Jean Wu was quiet for several minutes as they drove through the city streets. When he finally spoke, his voice held a thoughtful quality she hadn't heard before. "There are scholarship programs," he said. "Private foundations that support students from underrepresented communities in medical fields. I could provide introductions." Maya turned to stare at him, seeing something in his profile that she was beginning to recognize. Underneath the dangerous exterior and the criminal empire, Jean Wu Kim was a man who understood what it meant to sacrifice personal desires for family duty. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "Because you have proven yourself valuable," he replied, but Maya caught something in his tone that suggested the answer was more complicated than simple business calculation. They worked together until nearly midnight that night, translating a series of contracts for a legitimate shipping deal that would bring Korean electronics into the Pacific Northwest. The office was quiet except for the soft click of Maya's keyboard and the occasional sound of Jean Wu's pen against paper as he reviewed her translations. Maya found herself stealing glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking, noting the way concentration softened his features, the careful precision with which he approached every task. When he caught her watching, the eye contact held for several seconds longer than professional courtesy required. "You should go home," he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. "So should you," Maya replied, not moving to pack up her work. The silence stretched between them, charged with an awareness that had been building since the moment she had taken his injured hand in hers. Maya could feel the dangerous territory they were approaching, the way professional distance was giving way to something more complicated and far more risky. Jean Wu stood and moved to the window overlooking the city, and Maya found herself studying the line of his shoulders, the controlled power in his stance. "My world is not safe for people who matter to me," he said without turning around. "It is built on violence and the constant threat of retaliation. Those who enter it rarely leave unchanged." Maya stood as well, moving to join him at the window. The city spread out below them, lights creating patterns that looked almost peaceful from his height. "My world is built on other people's pain," she replied. Every day in clinical rotations, I see what violence and poverty and neglect do to people. I see the damage and try to help them heal from it. She turned to face him, and when he met her eyes, Maya saw something raw and vulnerable beneath his controlled exterior. Maybe that's exactly what you need, she said quietly. Someone who understands damage and knows how to help people heal from it. The tension between them was palpable now, electric and dangerous and absolutely inevitable. Maya could feel herself standing at the edge of choice that would change everything about her carefully planned life. Before either of them could move closer or step away, Jean Wu's phone buzzed with a text message that made his expression shift from vulnerable to coldly alert. "We are being watched," he said, his voice returning to the controlled tone Maya associated with danger. "Someone has been monitoring this building for the past week." Maya felt ice settle in her stomach as the implications became clear. In Jean Wu's world, watching meant targeting, and targeting meant someone had identified her as important enough to use as leverage. Her safe, ordinary life had just become a casualty of a war she was only beginning to understand. The black sedan followed Maya for 3 blocks before she admitted to herself that the paranoia Jean Wu had instilled in her over the past month was actually justified. She had noticed the car when she left the Kim Holdings building, dismissed it when it turned the same direction she did, and felt her blood turn to ice when it followed her through 2 unnecessary turns that led toward her apartment. Maya pulled out her phone with hands that trembled only slightly and dialed the number that Jean Wu had programmed under emergency contacts. He answered on the first ring. "I'm being followed," she said without preamble. Black sedan. License plate starts with KGF, 2 men in the front seat. "Where are you?" His voice sharp with immediate focus. 3 blocks from my apartment, heading north on 23rd. "Do not go home," Jean Wu commanded, and Maya could hear him moving, probably toward his car. "Drive to the Starbucks on Burnside and Morrison. Stay in public view. I will be there in 8 minutes. Maya changed direction at the next intersection, watching her rearview mirror as the sedan followed without attempting to conceal its presence. The men inside wanted her to know she was being tracked, wanted her afraid and aware of her vulnerability. In her world of medical training, this kind of psychological pressure was called intimidation therapy, designed to break down resistance through sustained stress. In Jean Wu's world, it was probably called a declaration of war. She made it to the coffee shop with her hands steady on the steering wheel, though her heart was hammering against her ribs with the force of pure adrenaline. The sedan parked across the street, its occupants making no effort to hide their surveillance. Maya ordered a coffee she didn't want and took a table near the window, where she could watch both the street and the entrance. The normalcy of the coffee shop felt surreal against the reality of being hunted by men whose intentions she could only guess at. Jean Wu arrived exactly 8 minutes later, and Maya felt her nervous system calm slightly at the sight of him striding through the door. He moved with the controlled urgency of someone accustomed to crisis management, and when his eyes found hers across the crowded coffee shop, something protective and possessive flared in their depths that took her breath away. He sat across from her without ordering anything, his attention focused entirely on the street outside. "How long have they been following you?" he asked, his voice pitched low enough that it wouldn't carry to neighboring tables. "Since I left the office. Maybe longer." Jean Wu's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The only sign of the fury Maya was learning to recognize beneath his controlled exterior. "This ends now," he said, standing with the fluid grace that preceded violence. "What are you going to do?" Maya asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "What I should have done the moment I realized someone was watching the building," he replied. "Remove the threat." Maya watched through the window as Jean Wu crossed the street with purpose that was both beautiful and terrifying. He approached the sedan from the passenger's side, and whatever he said to the men inside lasted less than 30 seconds. When he stepped back, the car pulled away from the curb and disappeared into traffic with the speed of people fleeing for their lives. Jean Wu returned to the coffee shop, but instead of sitting down, he extended his hand to Maya. "You are coming with me," he said. "Your apartment is no longer safe." Maya looked at his outstretched hand, recognizing the choice he was offering her. She could insist on returning to her normal life, pretend that being followed by dangerous men was something she could handle on her own. Or she could accept the protection of a man whose world was built on the management of violence and the elimination of threats. When she took his hand, his fingers closed around hers with a possessiveness that should have alarmed her. Instead, she felt the first genuine safety she had experienced since sending that desperate text message 6 weeks ago. Jean Wu's penthouse occupied the top floor of a building that commanded views of both the river and the city center. The security measures began in the parking garage with armed guards who nodded respectfully to Jean Wu and assessed Maya with professional thoroughness. The elevator required a key card, and Maya noticed cameras tracking their progress upward. The apartment itself was a study in controlled luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that looked custom-made, art that probably cost more than most people's houses. But underneath the sophistication, Maya recognized the same attention to security she had observed at his office. Reinforced doors, strategic sightlines, the kind of defensive positioning that turned a home into a fortress. "You will stay here until the threat is neutralized," Jean Wu said, setting her overnight bag in the guest room. "The building is secure, and my security team will monitor all access points." Maya turned to find him watching her with an intensity that made her acutely aware of the intimacy of their situation. For the first time since they had met, they were alone in a space that belonged to him personally, removed from the professional distance that had kept their attraction safely contained. "How long do you think that will take?" she asked. "That depends on who sent them and what they hope to accomplish," he replied. "But not long. I do not respond well to threats against people under my protection." The way he said protection carried weight that went beyond professional obligation, and Maya felt something shift between them, some barrier dissolving under the pressure of shared danger. They ordered dinner from a Korean restaurant that apparently delivered exclusively to Jean Wu's building, and Maya found herself watching him move through his kitchen with the same controlled precision he brought to everything else. When he handed her a glass of wine, their fingers brushed, and the contact lasted several seconds longer than necessary. "Your family," Maya said as they sat at his dining table with its view of the city lights. "Do they know about me?" Jean Wu paused with his chopsticks halfway to his mouth, and Maya caught something that might have been vulnerability flicker across his features. "My mother has expressed interest in meeting you," he said carefully. "She believes that anyone who can make me work past midnight on a regular basis must be either very dangerous or very important." Maya almost smiled. "And which does she think I am?" "She has not yet decided," Jean Wu replied, but there was something in his tone that suggested his mother's opinion mattered more than he was comfortable admitting. The following evening, Maya discovered exactly how much Jean Wu's family approval meant when his mother, aunt, and younger sister arrived for what was supposedly a casual dinner. Maya recognized the event for what it was, an evaluation disguised as hospitality, the kind of careful assessment that determined whether she would be accepted into the family or subtly encouraged to disappear. Jean Wu's mother was elegant in the way that spoke of old money and older traditions, her English accented but precise. His sister Mina was a law student at Portland State with the kind of quiet intelligence that Maya recognized from her own academic background. Throughout the meal, Maya found herself drawing on every lesson her grandmother had taught her about respect and dignity and the importance of honoring elders. She answered questions about her education and family background with the kind of detailed honesty that she hoped demonstrated sincerity rather than naivety. When the conversation turned to Korean culture and Maya was able to discuss traditional medicine practices with knowledge gained from her grandmother's stories, she saw Jean Wu's mother exchange a meaningful look with his aunt. "Your grandmother was wise, Mrs. Kim said after Maya described learning to make traditional healing teas. "These skills are being lost among the younger generation. She taught me that healing comes from understanding both the science and the spirit," Maya replied. "That you can't treat a person's body without considering their heart and their history." Jean Wu was watching her across the table with an expression that was carefully neutral, but Maya caught the slight tension around his eyes that suggested the conversation was more significant than it appeared. When his family finally left, kissing Maya's cheek and extracting promises that she would visit again soon, Jinwoo closed the door behind them and leaned against it with something that might have been relief. "They approve of you," he said. Maya turned to study his expression, seeing something there that she was beginning to understand was hope carefully disguised as control. "Is that important to you?" she asked. "In my world, family approval is everything," he replied, moving away from the door. "Without it, relationships become complications that create vulnerabilities. And with it, they become strengths that make us more powerful than we could be alone." Maya felt the weight of what he was suggesting, the way their relationship had moved beyond simple employer and employee, beyond the forced proximity that had brought them together. "Jinwoo," she said softly, "what are we doing here?" He crossed the room until he was standing close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the controlled desire in his eyes that he had been fighting for weeks. "We are acknowledging what has been building between us since the night you sent that message," he said. "We are admitting that this connection is more than convenience or circumstance." Maya looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability beneath his controlled exterior, the way he was offering her something precious and dangerous. "Your world is complicated," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "It is built on violence and secrets and the constant possibility of loss. But it is also built on loyalty and protection and the kind of devotion that most people never experience." Maya felt herself standing at the edge of choice that would change everything about who she was and what she wanted from life. She could step back, insist on maintaining the professional distance that had kept them both safe. Or she could acknowledge what she had been feeling since the moment he had appeared at her door, the way he had become essential to her sense of safety and possibility. When she moved closer instead of away, Jinwoo's control finally cracked. His hand came up to cup her face with a gentleness that belied everything dangerous about him. And Maya saw the moment when his protective instincts transformed into something deeper and more possessive. "You are mine to protect now," he said, his voice rough with emotion he had been holding back for weeks. "Mine to care for, mine to keep safe from anything that would harm you." Maya felt her last resistance dissolve under the weight of his absolute devotion. When she nodded, accepting what he was offering, Jinwoo's expression shifted from controlled hope to fierce satisfaction. Outside the penthouse windows, the city glittered with lights that represented millions of ordinary lives continuing their predictable patterns. But inside, Maya Williams acknowledged that her ordinary life was over, replaced by something far more dangerous and infinitely more precious. She belonged to Jinwoo Kim now, and he belonged to her in a way that transcended employment contracts and debt repayment, in a way that would change both of them forever. 3 weeks after the warehouse rescue, Maya sat in Jinwoo's home office watching him methodically destroy the contract that had bound her to him for the past 8 months. He fed each page into the industrial shredder with the same controlled precision he brought to everything else, and Maya felt something shift inside her chest as the last evidence of their forced arrangement disappeared into ribbons of paper. "Your debt is forgiven," he said, turning to face her with an expression that was carefully neutral. "You are free to leave at any time, return to your normal life, pursue your education without obligation to anyone." Maya looked around the office that had become as familiar to her as her own apartment, noting the medical textbooks he had purchased for her, the Korean language software he had installed on his computer so she could practice advanced technical translations, the small framed photograph of her grandmother that now sat on his desk beside pictures of his own family. "What if I don't want my normal life back?" she said quietly. Jinwoo's control wavered for just a moment, and Maya caught a glimpse of the vulnerability he had been hiding behind formal courtesy for weeks. "Then you stay because you choose to," he replied. "Not because circumstances or debt or obligation force you to." Maya stood and moved to the window overlooking the city where her ordinary life had existed before a desperate text message changed everything. She could see the community college where she was finishing her nursing degree, the neighborhoods where she had grown up believing that safety meant staying invisible to people who wielded real power. "I choose you," she said, turning back to face him. I choose this life, this partnership, this dangerous and complicated and absolutely extraordinary love we've built together. Jean Wu crossed the room with the fluid grace that had terrified her 8 months ago and now made her feel safe in ways she hadn't known were possible. When he took her hands, his touch was gentle despite the calluses that spoke of violence and the scars that mapped a history she was still learning to understand. Maya Williams, he said formally, as if they were negotiating a business contract rather than discussing the rest of their lives. Will you marry me? Not as my employee or my obligation or the woman I protect because duty demands it, but as my equal partner in everything we build together. Maya felt tears she hadn't expected gather in her eyes as she looked up at the man who had become essential to every vision of her future. Yes, she said, but I have conditions. Jean Wu's mouth curved in what might have been relief disguised as amusement. Of course you do. I finished nursing school, Maya said, stepping closer until she could smell his cologne and feel the warmth radiating from his skin. I establish a community clinic that serves both Korean-American families and the broader Portland community. And we do this as real partners, which means I know about all aspects of your business, not just the parts you think are safe enough for me to handle. Jean Wu was quiet for a long moment, and Maya could see him weighing the implications of what she was asking. In his world, knowledge was power, and power shared was control surrendered. Those conditions are acceptable, he said finally. With one addition of my own. Maya raised an eyebrow, channeling the confidence she had learned in their months of negotiations and partnership. You will allow me to provide the startup funding for your clinic, he said, and you will accept security measures appropriate to someone who is married to me, because my enemies will always see you as a way to strike at what I value most. Deal, Maya said, extending her hand with a smile that felt bright enough to light up the entire city. When Jean Wu took her hand and pulled her against him instead of shaking it, Maya felt the last barriers between them dissolve completely. His kiss was possessive and tender and full of promises about the future they were going to build together. The wedding took place 6 months later in a ceremony that blended Korean traditions with modern American equality. Maya wore her grandmother's jewelry and a dress that honored both cultures, while Jean Wu's family welcomed her with the kind of genuine warmth that spoke of true acceptance. During the traditional Korean tea ceremony, Maya's grandmother sat beside Jean Wu's mother, the two elderly women chatting in rapid Korean about grandchildren they expected to spoil and family recipes they planned to share. Maya caught Jean Wu watching their grandmothers with an expression of quiet satisfaction, and realized that he had orchestrated this marriage not just to claim her, but to weave their families together into something stronger than either could be alone. The reception was held at the Portland Art Museum, with guests that included both Maya's nursing school classmates and Jean Wu's business associates, a mixing of worlds that should have been awkward, but somehow felt perfectly natural. Maya's best friend, Keisha, who had finally learned the full story of the wrong number that had changed everything, raised a toast to the power of cosmic intervention and the wisdom of Korean Mafia bosses who knew a good thing when they accidentally received it. Dr. Park, who had been instrumental in the warehouse rescue, toasted to the healing power of love and the importance of having good security when you're married to someone who makes dangerous enemies. Jean Wu's sister Mina toasted to the strength of women who could make her terrifying older brother look at them like they hung the moon and convinced him to smile in public. A year after the wedding, Maya opened the Kim Family Community Health Center in a building that Jean Wu had purchased and renovated specifically for her practice. The clinic served 3 languages and operated on a sliding scale that ensured no one was turned away for inability to pay. Maya had finished her nursing degree with honors and was considering medical school applications, supported by scholarship programs that Jean Wu had quietly established through his legitimate business holdings. Jean Wu himself had gradually shifted his operations away from the gray areas that had once defined his empire, focusing instead on the legal businesses that could grow without requiring the constant threat of violence. Maya's influence had made him stronger, not softer, creating opportunities for expansion that didn't depend on fear and intimidation. On a quiet Thursday evening, Maya sat in their home office reviewing patient files while Jinwoo worked on quarterly reports for the import business that had become genuinely legitimate. The comfortable silence between them was punctuated by the soft click of her keyboard and the occasional rustle of his papers. When Jinwoo's phone buzzed with a text message, Maya looked up to find him staring at the screen with an expression of amused recognition. "What is it?" she asked. "A message sent to the wrong number," he replied, showing her the screen. "A college student asking for help with rent money." Maya leaned over to read the message, noting the desperation and genuine need that echoed her own plea from 2 years ago. "Are you going to help?" she asked. Jinwoo looked at her with the expression of controlled tenderness that had become as familiar to her as breathing, the look that said she was his anchor and his transformation and his greatest treasure. "We are going to help," he corrected. "Together." Maya smiled and moved to sit on the arm of his chair, looking out at the city lights that represented millions of ordinary lives continuing their predictable patterns, while she and Jinwoo built something extraordinary from the ashes of her desperate mistake. What do you think happens when someone sends a text to the wrong number and changes their entire life? Have you ever taken a risk that led to something better than you ever imagined? Let me know in the comments what you think about love that comes from the most unexpected places and whether you believe some wrong numbers are actually meant to find exactly the right person. Some wrong numbers, Maya had learned, were actually the most right connections possible. And some dangerous men turn out to be exactly the safe harbor that a strong woman needed to become everything she was meant to be.